Good day, folks. Welcome to session 9 of this program dealing with managing VAT in organizations. In this session, we'll start getting really practical. Now, the bad news is for some, this is where you have to start thinking for yourself. But don't worry, it will hurt initially, but the pain will go away eventually, and you'll find the wonder of thinking for yourself and coming up with solutions. What you'll see is you'll have to get to a point where enough is enough. You can't only refine a system to a certain level, and then you have to say, this is good enough. If there is a fallout, we'll deal with that fallout as it happens. So what will we be looking at? We'll be looking at a simple ledger structure, then a more complicated ledger structure, then the concept that the structure determines the accessibility of information. If your information is spread over a wide range of places and locations and transactions, you probably need a system that's a little bit more advanced than just a very simple system, but we'll have a look at that. And then we'll look at an example of a coding system. How do you code your transactions so the information ends up where it should? So let's have a look. Now that is a very simple structure. You've got an output tax control account and an input tax control account. Output tax goes to output, input goes to input. You don't distinguish between capital and non-capital because the organization is just too small. When you do your VAT return, you'll analyze the information in the control account and you'll do that split and just keep record of what you have done. So at the month end, you just clear that account, and this is a critical element of using a simple structure. That account must be nil or must be fully reconciled while it's not nil at the end of every month, and the payment from SARS or the receipt from SARS should be the balance on that control account, and then that all flows into your VAT return. Very simple. This is what most smaller businesses use, but when it comes to more complex environments, clearly you need more complex manners of dealing with information. And there is a much more complex situation. Now you can see that's a very busy slide. Now on the mini material, you'll probably be able to read it better. But essentially what this says is understand on the left-hand side, understand the sources of your information. What are the various processes in your organization? For example, the purchasing cycle, the sales cycle, the financing cycle, and so forth and so on. HR would also come in there. What information is generated by that? Where must that information go? And that is both for output tax and for input tax. And how does that, if that all of that information is extracted by way of automation, how does that information end up on a VAT return? And that is really what that tells you. The process of identifying resources, the process of taking data which has been generated as a result of the determination, and then the flow through to the ultimate VAT control account. Now there is just the same thing, just summarized slightly differently. There you can see on the left-hand side is your procurement cycle, the sales cycle, the HR cycle, the financial entries, and other. So you need to know where your VAT entries come from. Then you must decide, how many VAT control accounts do I want? Do I want a VAT control account for every block in the VAT return? That's in that middle column there. So on the left, we start off with accurate capturing. And that is where, when we talked about the policies and the procedures and all those good things, now they click in. So capturing is done accurately, and we'll look at the use of codes just now, which is an integral part thereof. That information goes into the VAT control accounts. It then gets split out in reports, and those reports will either link directly to a field, or maybe you want to combine certain fields. And this is where the issue comes in. At some point in time, enough is enough. You can't cater for every possible happening or VAT incidents in your organization. So the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Remember, that's what we've said right from the beginning. That principle continues when you set up that the VAT system, and that then flows into financial information or financial statements. In this case, it will be financial information with regards to VAT. But then and then again, that's a very small slide because the content is so much. But that is just an example. Let's saying if I have identified my transactions, and that goes right back to that initial sessions we had when you started looking at the risks in your organization, having identified what they are and determining what should be linked to them. Now what you're saying is, now you codify that. So, and you codify it for output tax and for input tax separately. So you may say in your business A1 standard rated supplies. Some organizations find that they need more than that because of the nature of the supplies they make. They may make general supplies, but also certain supplies which they want to know separately what the VAT consequences are, or what the transactions were that were dealt with in that, that fell within that category. Then you might need more than one code. But the setup of the ledger code and the implementation of that in the organization is absolutely critical. This is where junk goes in, junk's going to come out. This is also critical where a person, if it's not hard-coded, in other words, you can't change the VAT determination. If it's soft-coded, where a person has to make a decision, we're getting back to that default position. Remember, we talked about that. What is the most likely default position? Put that in as a default, and a person must then change that if they want to change it. And then a record of who has captured that document and who has made a decision on VAT. And then you could have things like red flags, which we also talked about before, where the system pulls this out and say, hang on, why is this changed? Why is it not the default? And then you may need some action around that. So what this really tells you, it really just tells you, how do you do that? How do you allocate codes? And this is just an example. Whatever codes you may want to use them, but they must be well communicated in your organizations, and they must be used accordingly. And any failures must be looked at very carefully, why that has happened. Is it a systems problem, or is it a human problem? And then the intervention at that point in time. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Like I've said, this is the place where you have to really sit and map it out and say, this is what we want. If in a perfect world, if a transaction enters there, it's going to go through these processes, it's going to end up in that control account, and from there it's going to be used in a certain manner and disclosed to SARS. That's the process. So that's a tedious process, but it's a once-off process. Thereafter, it is maintenance. So making certain that process is as close as perfect the first time around is the ideal situation. If you have to program and reprogram and change things afterwards, it really just causes uncertainty and sometimes complete chaos in organizations. And I've said before, the moment there's capacity for chaos in organization, there's capacity for fraud. Because they're in chaos, that's where fraud finds its ugly little tentacles, and it comes in very quickly. In the next session, we'll be looking at the VAT return itself very quickly, what must be disclosed where, and what is the concept of best fit as opposed to being 100% correct. But in the interim, this is me, Christo Teron, checking out for Tradetaxplus Management Services. Trust you enjoyed this. Have a wonderful day.